Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Kleinhans as we started to decorate for the holidays. As you see, it's going to be even more beautiful in another week. But we can enjoy some of our decorations tonight, and we're very glad you're here. This is our final classics concert before we move into our holiday season, and I hope that some of you will be able to join us next week for Pops or the week after for Classical Christmas. It's a very special time of the year, and we love to have you with us. So we're closing this portion of our classic season with a very special guest artist today, Lynn Harrell. Lynn has not been with the orchestra for many years, a long overdue visit to the Buffalo Philharmonic, and you probably have heard him maybe in soloist or chamber music, or when he was here with Max Valdez, I think was the last time. So we're very, very happy to have him with us playing an extraordinary piece. But let me start with the first piece on the program, which is by Zoltán Kodály, one of my favorite composers, a great Hungarian nationalist. Some of you know that Bartók and Kodály were very close colleagues, and when they were young, they spent a lot of time traveling together because they realized, this is, the sort of beginning of the 20th century, turn of the century into the 20th, that things were changing in Europe, and part of life was going to be lost forever, and they were very concerned about the musical history of Hungary, the folk music, because none of it had ever been written down. It was music that was simply sung from generation to generation, and people learned it and they sang it. It was not written anywhere. And as industrialization and modernization and progress was moving into Hungary, they were very concerned that this music would just disappear. So they spent a lot of time, months and months and months, traveling throughout Hungary together, and always going into the very smallest villages. They'd go there and they'd ask to speak to the oldest people in the village, and ask the oldest people to sing for them the songs that they remembered their grandparents singing to them. And there are wonderful pictures of Bartók and Kodály writing these songs down. Also, they had a kind of antique sort of record recorder, where they would sing into the little, cone, and the peasants really would sing these songs, and they amassed an amazing collection of Hungarian folk music that's just truly a treasury, and saved the music. And both of them said that they learned a lot more, they learned a great deal about music, of course, but they learned more about what's important in life in these journeys. And they went into these poor villages and spoke to people who had really nothing except family and the love for their country. And that stayed with them forever, this kind of Hungarian nationalism, this kind of love of simplicity and the earth and the core values of life. And I think we hear that in the music. And Bartók especially said that if he had to choose, and I think this is very sweet on his part, because Bartók is probably the great luminary in Hungarian music in the 20th century. But he always said, if he had to choose the greatest Hungarian composer, he said, if I were asked, whose music represents the spirit of Hungary in the most perfect way, I would reply instantly, it's in Kodály's music. His music is a profession of faith in our country. It's a profession of faith in the spirit of Hungary. His work as a composer is entirely rooted in the soil of Hungarian folk music. And you'll hear that tonight. These dances of Marosszek are actually dance music that he found on one of these journeys in a little town of Marosszek in a part of Hungary called Transylvania. Now, of course, you know Transylvania. We know Transylvania from Dracula, but Transylvania was, at that time, one of the most beautiful countrysides in the world. It was a stunningly beautiful place. The Hungarians refer to it as fairyland because it was amazingly gorgeous with forests and lakes and waterfalls. And in this little village of Marosszek, he collected actual folk songs. So what happens is he writes them for orchestra, but it could be a Hungarian band in a tavern playing. When you hear this music, that's what you hear. I mean, expanded by many people maybe, but it's the music that comes directly from the little tavern, someone playing or someone playing in their home. It's gypsy music with all of the trademarks of that, wonderful woodwind solos, brilliant writing for the strings, the sense of rubato so that it's always moving, it's never stiff, it's never stayed. It's dance music. And you'll hear it's a rondo form. So rondo means that there's a section that keeps coming back, A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, interspersed with other dance music. So the first dance you hear comes back in between every other dance form. It sounds a little bit different sometimes, orchestrated a little differently, but you'll hear the wild spirit of Hungary in this a 13-minute set of dances by Zoltán Kodály, one of his most heartwarming works. And if you haven't heard it, we hope that you enjoy it. The orchestra, actually, many of them had never played it, so it was a very nice discovery for us this week to do the Marosszek dances. I'm going to skip to the final piece on the program, which is one of the greatest works of Johannes Brahms, his last symphony. I was just sitting back there talking to Michael Ludwig, and I said to him, which is your favorite Brahms symphony? It's just because I can never choose. And he says, well, tonight it's the fourth. And that's how I feel. I mean, I know it sounds silly to say that, but when I'm doing the fourth, I can't imagine that any of the others are as great as the fourth. When I'm doing the first, I feel the same way. When I'm doing the second, I feel the same way. But tonight we're just steeped in this E minor of Brahms' Fourth Symphony. He wrote it when he was 55 years old. So it's the kind of an autumnal piece in a way. It's Brahms' final statement of the classical symphony. I mean, you know that Brahms was he was a tremendously innovative composer, but he was a composer who always looked backwards. He always looked towards Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn, not like Wagner and Liszt, who were looking towards the future and changing the rules, breaking the rules, and creating a new music. Brahms had enormous reverence for the music of the past. Those were his idols. Beethoven, of course. So he took their form, the form that they had so much respect for, the symphonic form, and he imbued it with a kind of romantic spirit. I mean, I always say that Brahms is kind of a split personality, a romantic heart, and maybe a classical head. I don't know, but he's imbued in this spirit of elegance and structure and restraint. That is the hallmark of the classical period. But underneath all of that, there's such a romanticism because he was of the time of great romanticism. So it's almost as if in his music there's this feeling of friction. There's like two different parts of a personality that are coexisting, not always so comfortably with each other, just rubbing against each other somehow and creating music of enormous power because of this. So since this is Brahms' last symphony, in some ways it's really the last true symphony. After that, symphonies were written, of course, but the form was broken apart and changed, and now we have people calling pieces symphonies that have nothing to do with a Beethoven symphony, with that structure of four movements. But Brahms respected that all of his life. So in a way, it's a kind of farewell to the symphonic form, and it's a work of great power, great integrity. Brahms was a person of enormous integrity. It's restrained, it's disciplined, but it has a kind of emotion of a heroic character, which you'll hear. It's tragic, yet it's victorious at the same time. And again, only Brahms could sort of combine those things. There's one especially beautiful description of this piece that I've never forgotten, because at the beginning, when Brahms first performed this, people didn't understand it as well. They found it different from his other symphonies, and took a little while for people to become comfortable with the work that we now are very comfortable with, but they weren't. And he said, this symphony is like a dark well. The longer we look into it, the more brightly the stars shine back at us. And it takes a little while to see the brilliance in this piece. I mean, maybe on a first hearing, but I think that you know the work and you'll recognize this incredible power and brilliance in it. A lot of unusual things in it. Brahms has the first and fourth movement in a minor key. That was very rare for symphonies. Generally, they like to start them in a major key and end them in a major key, or in Beethoven's case, start in a minor key and end in a major key. But Brahms actually frames it in E minor, and the two middle movements are in major. Very rare. Rare for Brahms, too, is the third movement. He introduces instruments he didn't always use. Brahms liked to use the instruments that Beethoven and Mozart used. He introduces a piccolo and a triangle. Very, very rare. And that third movement is one of his most buoyant and kind of brilliant and upbeat movements that he ever wrote. The last movement is really a tour de force of a very old form called a Passacaglia. For that, Brahms is even going back before Beethoven and Mozart. He's going back to the Baroque period. Passacaglia is a theme and variations form, except in a Passacaglia, instead of having a melody that then has all kinds of variations applied to it, the melody is the bass line, the chord progression. It's 8 bars long, and that's the theme. This 8-bar chord progression. And the beginning of you'll hear it right at the beginning of the fourth movement from the brass, this 8 mighty chords. That's the theme. And then he subjects that theme to 30 variations, all 8 bars long. It's amazing that if you didn't know that, you would never guess it, because it's so interesting, they're so different, but the underpinning of it are these 8 chords that keep being repeated over 30 times, that little theme, 30 times repeated. A Baroque, a simple Baroque form made into something extraordinarily complex in Brahms's hands in this amazing Passacaglia. It's true about Brahms that his music is incredibly complicated. I remember when I first was studying conducting, when I went to the conservatory in my first year, I was 18, we spent an entire year studying Brahms' First Symphony, an entire year, and we needed an entire year. And still, the next time I looked at it, I felt I was looking at something that I hadn't seen most of it. I hadn't realized most of it. Brahms' music is so extraordinarily complex inside the orchestra, second winds, violas, second violins, unbelievably complicated, all kinds of elisions, very progressive rhythms underneath. But when you listen to it, it sounds inevitable, it sounds simple, it sounds graceful, it sounds songful and cantabile. It doesn't sound complicated, which to me is the hallmark of a great composer. I mean, it's endlessly fascinating, but never obtruse. It's always right there for us in this great romantic heart. So we've really enjoyed playing this music. This music is music that's written for an orchestra to sound beautiful in. I mean, we all feel that way, especially, well, everybody. The strings especially enjoy playing Brahms. But so that ends our program. In between, we have one of the most beautiful cello concertos, the Elgar Cello Concerto. And in some ways, it's like the Brahms in that it also is an autumnal piece. Elgar wrote this towards the end of his life. And he wrote it at a very sad period in his life. It was right after World War I. It was 1918. And he was very disillusioned by what had happened in England. And it was more than the war itself. It was really that the world was changed. You know, the life that he knew as an Englishman before World War I would never come again. His country was damaged. That lifestyle of gentility and a kind of old world courtesy would never be again. So he had a great deal of difficulty dealing with the way the world had changed. And he realized that the war had thrust England and the whole world into a future that was very grim. He felt the 20th century was a century that was very grim. A reality, yes, but nothing that he was happy about. He was 62 years old, and he was retreating more and more to live in his country home in Sussex. And that's where he wrote his final pieces towards the end of his life. A violin sonata, string quartet, a piano quintet, all chamber pieces, and this one cello concerto, which is a wonderful piece. Unusual for him. It's reflective, very subjective, meditative. It's filled with a kind of autumnal melancholy and resignation. Doesn't have the kind of pomp and swagger of his early works. If you think of his Pomp and Circumstance, that kind of Edward Elgar, you know, the great sort of writer to the royalty. I mean, that sort of filled with the kind of grandeur of England. It's not there anymore, and he feels it's not there. But it's so eloquent and it's so sublime, wistful, very subtle. When he was asked what it meant, he said, meaning of this concerto, he said, it's a man's attitude towards life. And exactly what it was his attitude looking back at life at this point in 1918. Some people have actually called it his war requiem, because it's his way of saying goodbye to a life that the war had changed. When Lynn Harrell was talking to us in the rehearsals about this, he became so overwhelmed that he actually had to stop talking for a while, because he was so moved by this, and you'll hear it, especially in the last movement. But the first movement it starts with some sort of connection to Bach or something. It sounds almost, looking backwards, to like Brahms at the very beginning. The second movement is a scherzo. It's more virtuosic, and the third is a very short movement, adagio, 60 measures, only 60 bars of music, very lyrical, very, very spiritual, meditative. Again, thinking about what's happened. But it's the fourth movement, I think, that Mr. Harrell finds the most moving, because the fourth movement starts out with a kind of British swagger about, you know, the British Empire that ruled the world at this time, you know, and before this time. This was a great empire, and this kind of self-confidence and virility and strength. And the piece starts that way. The fourth movement starts that way, with this kind of, you know, outburst of, yes, we can do this. And then towards the end, it changes into something that seems bewildered, that seems overwhelmed, that is England all of a sudden thinking about what the war has done, all the lives of these young boys who were lost, so many of them, and how the world has changed. And you'll hear that moment when it happens. It's as if all of a sudden you realize there's nothing to celebrate. We've changed the world in a terrible way. And the piece ends that way. I mean, at the very end, there's a little bit of a flurry of a virtuoso writing for the cello. But the heart of that movement is that kind of reflective of what's happened to us, what has happened. And in the most beautiful writing, but definitely a moment where it's very, very moving. So you really can't hear the piece without knowing that it's about the great tragedy of World War I, especially how Edward Elgar saw it. And he never really recovered from that. After the war, England, his life was really over. But he gives us this final testament, in a way, saying that this is a requiem for what happened to us. And maybe it's a very strong anti-war statement when you hear this final movement. But the whole piece is tinged with this kind of melancholy, but in a very, very beautiful way. Now, Lynn Harrell, I asked him to come and speak to us, but he said, I can't talk about the Elgar before I play it. And I think you understand why when you hear him play it. He said, I just can't talk about it. So we invited our favorite cellist out to come and talk to you a little bit about the piece and about the cello. Someone that maybe you've seen him, you've heard him play, but you may not have heard him actually speak too much. And I'm so happy that he agreed to come out and talk to us. Let's welcome our principal cellist, Roman McKinliffe. Roman, I was just saying that you are a magnificent representative of your instrument, and that Mr. Harrell felt that he wanted to really reflect on the Elgar. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. That's a compliment to me. Thanks.
No, we're you know how proud we are of Roman, and I know that you see him all the time right up there. But first, give me your impressions before we talk a little bit about your history on the cello of the Elgar Concerto. Is it a piece that you like, that you've played, that you've thought about?
Well, you know, from a listener point of view, or even a cellist, you pretty much said it all. I was listening to you backstage. I got pretty much nothing to say. It's very melancholic and it's beautiful. I mean, the concerto is nicely spaced. They're fast movement and they're slow movement and they're fast and slow together, you know, and it's written really beautiful for cello. So really brings out the bass strings and the tops and it takes you know, it takes a masterful cellist to play one. So it's definitely on top of the repertoire there. And
well, it's a beautiful part for the orchestra too, isn't it, Roman? Because we're enjoying accompanying him.
I agree, but you know, most on this side we're all watching the legend here. So.
Yeah. Well, and you know, Roman is situated in a way that he can actually see Mr. Harrell very
most
clearly.
of the time.
Most of the time. No, I was going to say this. Roman has to remind me sometimes not to block his view. So I've actually written in my score, you know, stay out of Roman's way, because you'll notice that he's actually looking at Lynn and playing with him. I mean, it's like playing chamber music, and he's looking back at you.
Right. There's a lot of stuff that we actually play together, and we need to take the melody off each other, and sometimes we play in unison. So it is important that we stay connected.
Yeah. Well, and it's been a thrill to have him here. You played with him before?
I have never did. I never played with him before, and you know, he's one of those legends that is always there, you know, and is like a celebrity of classical music, and it's always there, and it's all of a sudden he's right here in front of you. Yeah. It's pretty impressive. Yeah,
and talking about the piece to us, as I mentioned, it's obviously a piece that means a lot to him.
Oh my God, I thought he was gonna tear up. Yeah. He couldn't, choked up.
Yeah. Well, he's probably around the age that Edward Elgar was when he wrote this, right? So he's thinking, you know, you're thinking about yourself at that time of life, and of course in a very difficult situation there after the war, But now, tell us a little bit more about yourself, because I'm sure people are very curious. Roman came to us from the Sao Paulo Symphony, and I always felt sorry for them when they lost you, Roman, because I know they were very unhappy. He was the principal in Sao Paulo, and I'm sure that conductor has never forgiven me for asking you to come here.
Well, you know, I kept it a big secret until I really got the job here. So he didn't know. He took it very personal there.
I'm sure he did.
So,
I'm sure he was not happy.
No, and they, you know, they called me back, but we already situated here. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we are very happy.
Tell
us why. Why the cello? Did you choose that as a child, or?
No, actually, I think my parents picked the cello, and I'm not so sure that they picked it because they loved it, or they both play piano, or they picked the cello so that they don't choke me if I play the piano. You know, I think that must have been
to give you a little independence.
Oh my God, yes, I think so. You know, having kids who play the instrument, I know exactly how it is. I'm very thankful.
Yes.
That,
well,
you know,
Roman has a beautiful daughter who plays cello also.
My son also plays cello, and I try to stay away as much as possible from from their cello practicing. But and I think I was 4.5. I started on the piano, and then my parents said, "What do you think about cello?" 5-year-old, I didn't know anything. You know, they're like, "Okay, you're doing cello."
Was it something that you felt good about right away, or how did it appeal to you?
You know, I personally don't know it. Some kids at 5, mostly girls, didn't know what they're doing. Boys, not so much. No, at 5, I just, you know, it was just something to do, but I bonded. The cello was sort of a thing to do for me, and it was, you know, quickly become a very entertaining. I sort of got attached to cello and never liked to practice, but.
Well, then, was there a moment, let's say when you were a teenager or something, that you said, okay, now this is the road for me?
Yes, it was.
What happened?
Back in Russia, you finish your school. It's sort of a high school in between at 14, and my dad said, okay, I don't want to press you, what are you going to do? You can go and explore your options, or you can keep continuing music. And there was no doubt I did want to do music. I also happened to play hockey. I really wanted to stick around with it, but yeah, I chose cello.
Roman was a very talented hockey player.
No regrets here, so it's okay.
It's too dangerous, though, at a certain point to play hockey as a musician, right?
Yeah, so.
Yeah. And then so tell us where you were born in what city in Russia?
St. Petersburg, or
so you spent your childhood there.
As Lynn Harrell says, Venice of Russia.
Is it true?
Venice of North, or something like that.
Is it that beautiful?
It is that beautiful, yes.
We probably have people who've been to St. Petersburg, right? It's just. And then when did you leave?
In 1989, I was just 17 years old and just immigrated to United States, New York. And
went to Juilliard, right?
Went to Juilliard right away, and miss you by a year there.
I know, but we actually met. I was just leaving Juilliard. You came in, but I came back as a guest conductor,
yes.
And Roman was in the orchestra. Little did I know that he was going to be my principal cellist. My gosh, I mean, what an amazing thing. But
I think that's the first thing I told you once. You said, "I think you got the job," and I said, "Oh, actually, I think I've met you before."
Yeah, at Juilliard, it was amazing. But so that was good. That was a good experience studying at Juilliard.
I had a fantastic cello teacher. His name was Harvey Shapiro. God bless him. He was 90 years old by the time I got to Juilliard, and he smoked Cuban cigars and drank scotch. But he really, he put me on basics and really brought me as a cellist. I was somewhat a raw talent where I sort of was very musical, but my cello skills lacked until I got to Juilliard, and he's the one responsible for my cello playing, pretty much.
And then I know that you played also with the New York Philharmonic for a sub quite often.
Yes.
But what brought you to South America then?
Well, New York Philharmonic was a nice paycheck but it was just a substitute job. So at times I would go on tours with them and feel like I'm in an orchestra, but sometimes they don't need the extra cellist. So São Paulo was a new orchestra, and it was a principal job, and they offered me, and it was a permanent job, and the orchestra was touring, and had a lot of conductors from Europe coming, from America. So it was supposedly top orchestra in South America, and it actually, right now, it is.
How many years were you there, Roman?
Only 4 years. 4 years.
What made you decide to, because I know you were thinking about moving back to the States.
Well, my wife always wanted to come back. She probably was the engine behind it, like, most of the things sometimes in the...
Like most wives.
Yeah, she wanted to come back. I wanted to come back to U.S., but I didn't want to come back with nothing, because in Brazil, the atmosphere of music was very favorable. We had a lot of classical concerts, and a lot of great soloists, and musicians were regarded as superstars, pretty much. So I was not as willing to just let it go right away. But we had our daughter there, and son was on the way, and that was really the best decision to come back.
Well, and you became our superstar, right? Am I right? Is Roman our superstar?
Yeah.
I mean it. Well, I'm going to embarrass Roman just a little bit more than let him rest for a bit. You've not only have you greatly enhanced my enjoyment of working on this music because of your passion. I think I speak for all the audience in saying, seeing your passion and feeling your love for this music has greatly enhanced our whole experience together, Roman.
Well, with you, it's likewise. Also with audience, because without you guys, we won't be here, right? And it's a special feeling when you play a live music and you feed off the audience that is listening and watching you. It's a whole different atmosphere, And when this beautiful hall is filled with wonderful people listening to a concert, it's a whole different ball game here.
Well, It is, and I know that Roman speaks for all of our musicians in saying that. We are so happy and thankful that you are our family here. And Roman, I'm speaking for everybody here. We are so glad that you decided to leave Sao Paulo and come here.
Oh, I'm glad too. No regrets.
Thank you very much.